I have been working in this area for a very long time, so I think my main advantage is my age, maybe, because these problems have been going on for a very long time. Although I do think that we are at a kind of turning point. I think it's still another step on what, as I say, has been a very long road. As Carlos has pointed out, the issues are not just about digitalization. Digitalization is the latest phase of a process of globalization, which I think in the tax area really started particularly back in the 70s with dematerialization of economic activities, which was already manifested in the shift to the services economy. So what we've seen now is the digitalization of services, but already with the shift to services and internationalization of services, many of these problems were already experienced, and experienced particularly by lower income countries, which have been primarily importers of services. So it is a long-standing problem. And it's only finally now, with this latest phase of digitalization, that many also of the more developed countries are experiencing the same problem. So I think we do need to put it in that broader context. And I think we are finally reaching some kind of a turning point where we do at least have a proposal to consider multinational corporations on the basis that they are single firms. The main, I think, step forward, particularly in Pillar 1, is that it does start from the global profits, and we are finally talking about how to allocate the global profits. But obviously, this is in a rather limited way so far. As Carlos has pointed out, the African group has proposed, I think, a much better and simpler approach, and we have to see what comes of that. So that will be a step forward, I think, in some ways a turning point, but not the end of the road. I'll talk mainly about the second pillar, Pillar 2, because clearly to reform international tax rules is quite a difficult task. Implementation of Pillar 1 is envisaged in the blueprint to require a multilateral tax treaty, which I think will be a very difficult undertaking. But the main way of pushing countries into doing that is to address what Pillar 2 is addressing, the problem of undertaxed profits, and also tax competition, the competition among states to offer tax advantages to companies. Now, this is a beggar thy neighbor approach. In the area of international trade, we talk of beggar thy neighbor in the sense that countries attempted to introduce measures that really hit other countries while not really benefiting themselves very much. And that leads to a race to the bottom. So Pillar 2 aims to address this by trying to have stronger international coordination on the taxation of undertaxed profits. Now, I think the blueprint for Pillar 2 in many respects really was very significant. It discussed and put forward technical proposals on the building blocks. So in many respects, it has put into place the possibilities of a really quite effective approach. But the design in Pillar 2 has some fundamental flaws, which I think have been highlighted by comments, particularly from lower income countries. And I think the reason for that is that it is the lower income countries that are most aware of the problem. And the proposals they put forward, as the G24 group's proposals point out, are actually in the interest of all countries. The proposal to rebalance the allocation of tax rights in Pillar 2, I think would benefit all countries. The major flaw, I think, in Pillar 2 is the imbalance of taxation rights that it proposes. The central element of Pillar 2 is a so-called globe, which has two elements. It has a right for home countries of multinationals to tax undertaxed profits, and it has a right for source countries, countries where activities take place, to tax undertaxed profits, but it proposes to give priority to the home country. Now, that's an extension of rules which already exist in many countries, the so-called rules on control foreign corporations. These allow the country of residence of the parent company of a multinational to deem its worldwide profits as attributable to the shareholder, to the parent company, and to apply a tax to those profits. Normally, CFC rules are limited to passive income and to income declared in low tax jurisdictions defined in various ways. But the other important element of CFC rules is that they give a credit to source country taxes. So CFC rules in many ways have the advantage that they do give source countries the primary right. But what's proposed in Pillar 2 at the moment is to require priority for the home country, the so-called income inclusion rule. So that would be, the priority rule would be the jurisdiction of the ultimate parent. If the ultimate parent did not apply tax on under-taxed profits, then an intermediate parent company could do so. And it's only if neither of those jurisdictions applies the so-called income inclusion rule that then a source country could apply what's called the under-taxed payments rule. Now, I think quite rightly, lower income countries, both through the G24 and through the ATAF, have said essentially that this is not acceptable. Now, I think that's understood also because the Pillar 2 blueprint does propose a third rule, the so-called subject to tax rule. But that would require changes to tax treaties. That would apply a fairly familiar mechanism for developing countries, denial of a deduction. But the way that it's been formulated in the blueprint, it could only be introduced with changes to tax treaties. And what now seems to be envisaged is to go ahead quickly with the GLOBE, with its two components, the income inclusion rule and the undertax payment rule, and then maybe introduce the subject to tax rule when tax treaties can be changed. Now, I think rightly, the G24 said this is not acceptable, and source country taxation, maybe through the subject to tax rule, should be an integral part. So I think that's really the key element. There's been a lot of discussion, obviously, about the minimum effective tax rate, and I think it's welcome that this talk of having it as low as 12.5% has gone. Now apparently 15%, but 15%, I think even the G7 has said should be the minimum, and certainly a higher rate should be envisaged. But probably as important, if not more important, is rule order, because the issue is who gets the right to tax these under-taxed profits. Now, a group of us from NGOs have put forward what we call the minimum effective tax rate, the META proposal, which would resolve the problem by remodeling the GLOBE and allocate on a formulaic basis, allocate the right to tax the under-taxed profits. So it would use the same building blocks in the Pillar 2 blueprint for defining the effective tax rate and identifying the under-taxed profits, but instead of a top-up tax, it would allocate the under-taxed profits on a formulaic basis to countries on the basis of where the multinational has real activities. And the formulaic basis, I think, is the one that is familiar, both from national tax systems in federal countries like the USA, the so-called three-part formula. It's been proposed also within the EU. So it would be a formulaic or formulary approach to reallocate the right to tax under-tax profits according to where each company has sales, assets, and employees. Now that will be a balanced allocation of the taxing right. Now, maybe the inclusive framework won't adopt that proposal as it stands, but in any case, clearly a better solution needs to be found for the priority issue. If not, then I see no reason why countries that are primarily source countries should join in a Pillar 2 proposal. There's no way in which they can be required to give priority to the income inclusion rule, and they should not do so. There are other mechanisms that they could develop, either on a purely unilateral basis, but preferably jointly. They could already build on other measures for defending the source tax base. They could introduce alternative minimum taxes. They could defend the source tax base by applying the principal purpose test to deny deductions for payments that go to conduits located in low tax jurisdictions if the motive is primarily tax avoidance. So there are many ways, I think, in which source countries could protect the source tax base themselves. So unless the proposals that have come from G24 and others for a balanced allocation of taxing rights under Pillar 2 are accepted, then I think there will be no reason to join in a Pillar 2 which gives priority to home country taxation of undertaxed profits, which, as I say, goes beyond existing CFC rules. It could only be enforced on countries if they accepted that restriction, and there's no reason why they should accept that. Thank you very much.